Ira.
Yeah.
Hello. Welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for coming.
I brought you here today to talk about The Incredibles 2.
Okay. You could have told me that before I, showed up.
Before you walked in here. Yeah, I thought you might react this way.
I just don't want to be the bad guy.
What does it even mean to be the bad guy, Ira?
Oh, is that your question? Well, I actually have lots of thoughts about what it means to be the bad guy in a good movie, but we'll get to that later.
What if the bad guy was actually the bad lady?
Oh, this is kind of like the what if God was one of us question.
Yes. Okay, and what if that lady had inscrutable and kind of muddled motivations that didn't really make a ton of sense? Question mark.
Oh, so you're talking like a completely convoluted plot that really doesn't seem to go anywhere and makes you wonder why you went to the movie theater in the first place.
Yeah, but I have good news for you. It has characters in it that we've seen before.
Oh, sign me up. If it's familiar, I'm here for it.
All right, roll theme song. Welcome to Cartoon Feelings.
Now, one more take on the Welcome to Cartoon Feelings.
It's a sequel. Gotta do good. Welcome to Cartoon
We jump ahead from The Incredibles 1 to The Incredibles 2. 15 years later?
I think it's more. Well, no, I think it's 14.
14, yeah, pretty close. Let's say around 15. Sounds more dramatic.
An incredible amount. Ha 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 ha.
Now, I don't need to timestamp every episode, but these days, at the time of recording, movie theaters are kind of disappearing. So I thought we could talk about seeing this in the theater. Because I remember seeing this one in the theater. So far that it's very clear, 2018, June 15th.
As do I. I also remember specifically seeing this in the theater.
This was a window of time where I had this routine of working through the weekend, and I would take Monday off and kind of have an Ira day. And I would do one of my favorite things, which is going to a movie in the middle of the fucking day.
The best time.
So I saw this movie with like a bunch of one parent, one child combos because it was just, Monday, midday. I don't know. Kids should be in school, I say, but who am I?
The coolest parenting move you can possibly do is to take your kid out of school for a day to go see a movie.
Yeah. And you were saying last time, The Incredibles, it's just a great theater movie. Because we were talking about the theme song and how it just gets you jazzed. And I remember feeling like that when this movie started. So what I'm getting at is I was ready to be caught up in this movie. I had no ill will or bad feelings or negative attitudes. I just went in and I wanted to love it. So, we'll get where we go. But I just wanted to say that right off the bat.
I totally get that. I don't remember the mindset that I had going into it. And I do want to indicate to the audience that my movie theater experience of watching this was actually terrible. I don't remember what time of day we went, but it was just one of those things where the audience was like, no one was paying attention. We sat by a passel of teens that were like planning out the rest of their day out loud the entire time and like on their phones, like Google mapping stuff. And I remember just sitting there being like, I don't know what's going on in this movie because like it was very distracting, obviously. But I thought maybe that overshadowed how I felt about this movie, but it really didn't. Rewatching in the comfort of my own home did not affect my ultimate opinion on the film, for better or for worse.
That's good. Those teens didn't. They ruined that day, but not all your days.
Really? I was just like, why are you, get out of here. I don't know. Yeah. I'm like never wanting to like say, I don't want to be that person who's like, hush in the theater, but.
Yeah. I mean, why go? Well, whatever. We don't have to complain about youth. But the kids in my theater, they were having a ball. And I think at times it was a roller coaster for them. And there's a lot of the stuff in this movie that we'll get to that I'm questioning, is this actual kids content? Or is this a studio running amok? But we'll get there. But I thought before we get into the cartoonness of it, let's just see what was at the box office here on June 15th. Just to, so everybody knows what movies we've seen, because I think that's important.
It is important.
Okay, notable at the box office. So not necessarily in every theater premiering, but like this stuff is hanging around. Last time it was very few superhero movies, but here we are 15 years later, and that's basically everything's a sequel or a superhero movie or a reboot or a franchise or whatever. So you've got Solo, Star Wars. Saw it?
No.
Okay.
I've never seen it.
That's fine. Good. We don't have to talk about Star Wars this episode. In fact, I'd love it if we don't talk about Star Wars this episode.
It's going to come out probably.
No, it just did, and now it's gone. All right. Deadpool 2.
Nope.
Good. Me neither. Definitely don't want to hear what I have to say about Deadpool.
None of y'all want to hear it.
All right. Now, here we go. Avengers. I put an apostrophe in Avengers, so it's possessive Infinity War, which I don't think is correct.
I don't think that's correct either,
it's
but I will
Infinity War?
Allow it.
Okay.
I mean, it's all of our Infinity War. We were all involved. Half of us didn't make it.
Yeah. Did you? So you saw this one, you know what the Infinity War was all about.
Yeah. This is the second one, right? Or is this the first one? Is Endgame the last one? I get these confused all the time. I've seen both of them more than once.
Yeah, this is the first part of the two-part movie.
But yes, I did see this. And I thought it was fine.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, we're juggling a lot of ideas. I think that's the takeaway here is people are ready to hear stories with many characters in them. No one was overwhelmed by Infinity War, I don't think. Unless, for some reason you were stepping into this Marvel universe for the first time. So I just think that's kind of an important point in the culture to reach. If you're going to do a sequel to your Incredibles movie and, not even Shrek. Anyway, A Wrinkle in Time. Did you see that one? I
did not see A Wrinkle in Time. Did you see A Wrinkle in Time?
Yeah, I thought it was fine. It was not for me specifically. It's, but I'm glad they made it, and whoever loves it, I'm glad you love it. Okay. Well, Black Panther's still kicking around.
Yes, I saw Black Panther. I enjoyed Black Panther. I actually didn't see that in theaters either. Mm-hmm. And fun fact, we're really stupid. And, they didn't have subtitles on the digital version that we watched from Amazon. And so for a lot of the movie, we were like, it's a really bold choice for them to have in the non-English speaking scenes to not subtitle it. Like, that's very advanced for an MCU movie. It turns out that Amazon was just broken. So we had to rewatch it again to get the full experience. But I really liked that movie a lot.
Yeah.
I thought it was really fun.
Yeah, that one's a real touchstone. That's I feel like that's one of those, see, this is why theaters are important type of thing. It was like such a collective experience going to that movie. I think I saw it twice and I was fine with it, but I more loved the feeling of going to watch it with people because everybody was very excited about that movie. And like, what more do you want from going to the theater? Yeah,
like that is what, I don't know. This is a whole different topic, but that's what if theaters are going to go away, not having those blockbuster experiences, like the loss of that is very significant for me.
Yeah, the togetherness.
Yeah, even though I missed out on this one technically, but
you could imagine how fun it was.
Yeah, it's always nice when like you feel like everyone is really hyped for something, and then you can go and you're in that crowd and you feel everybody's energy. I feel like that's what's important about movie theaters, about stuff like this. So
yeah. Anyway. All right, one last one I'm going to point out because I don't know, this is just a type of movie that gets made, and Incredibles 2 is a little bit of that. Ocean's 8, which is kind of did you see Ocean's 8?
No, I did think you were going to talk about Rampage, because I saw it in your list of box office movies, but no, I didn't see Ocean's 8.
Okay. Do you know what the deal is with Ocean's 8?
I do. It's a lady version of Ocean's 11 and 12 and 13, correct?
Yeah. And it's fine. Yeah, it doesn't, for some reason, has to be compared to the other ones, like every sort of thing like this. And I don't know, maybe I have the question, is Incredibles 2 in a way a strategy like Ocean's 8 was to just sort of like shift the point of view a little bit of something familiar? But maybe not. I might be wrong. These are just things that are floating around my head. I haven't written any of this down, so it's not real.
That is usually how it works. Yeah.
Okay. So that's what's around at this time. So whatever that means.
Well, it is really interesting to me that almost all of these are a continuation of some previous story or a part of that. Because it wasn't Black Panther 2, but, you know, it's still part of this whole, I don't know, like A Wrinkle in Time is looking at this list like the most original out of all of these. And obviously it's not, you know, it's based off the book. It's just very unnerving to me in a way. Something that I think we're all aware of is just a lot of stuff comes out these days that is just more of the same stuff. And I don't know, maybe it's just fatigue from 2020, but it's really exhausting. And exhausting is kind of how Incredibles 2, how I would maybe describe it.
Yeah, it's all, and I mean, this is, I guess, the nature of the modern box office where like theaters are struggling to, I mean, maybe they would love to show some indie stuff, but if people are going to go to the theater, they want an action adventure movie that's not going to surprise them, right? They want a theme park ride. And yeah, A Wrinkle in Time is the only one that it at least slightly strives to be a little sci-fi, whereas the rest of these have maybe sci-fi elements, but they're just action fantasy. So, I mean, that's part of the exhaustion is it's just all the same genre.
Yeah.
It's all the same story beats.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Right. But what's not is the short that precedes The Incredibles. I don't know if we haven't really, I know you want to, and I do too, do an episode about the shorts. Did you want to say anything about the one here?
I want to talk about these. I think it's a good idea to talk about the shorts that are attached to the movies, you know, in the situations that happens. But I really haven't seen this one recently. It was kind of hard for me to remember. I
just wanted to mention quickly that when I saw Bao in the theater, it was blowing some adults' minds. There's the scene where the mother eats the dumpling. And there was just like shock and awe throughout the theater. Yeah. Which I thought was kind of magical.
I actually remember, I'm glad you mentioned this because I had kind of buried some of this. And I remember being shocked when that happened too, just because I was very invested in what was happening. And then that happens and you're like, oh, like that's not something you see a lot. But people in my theater were exclaiming and in a very like, I don't get this and I don't like it way. Yeah. I remember that kind of pissing me off a little bit because I'm like, I don't know. I can't speak to it too much, but for people to just be like, this is ridiculous or whatever they said, just because like maybe you're having trouble following along, I guess, or taking it really literally.
Wow. I'm glad you said exactly that because now that I think about it, this is exactly what I wanted to do this podcast for, is to talk about that sort of response because I feel, you know, we get really emotional about these movies, but it's not like that. We don't turn against them in the way like I've never felt disgust about anything I've seen in animation because at the end of the day, it's I don't know, it's either a drawing or a painting or a rendering through a computer. Like I don't respond to it like I would respond to a person. But sometimes people respond to cartoons that way. And I think that's weird. Like to hear somebody be totally grossed out by a visual like that, like we've implied that the sun is the dumpling and the mom ate them, therefore she's eating the sun. I get it. That's not an uncommon cartoon move to have like an object sub in for an identity or a person. But to be disgusted it's just weird. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
No, I mean, it's interesting. And there are certainly pieces of all kinds of media that I have probably reacted to in a way where I'm repelled by. But like, I like to think, and I wish I could think of an example right now. Of course I can't. I like to think that it's because it's saying something that I understand and don't like, you know, saying some kind of aggressive thing about how people are, I don't know, something that I just don't agree with. And even then I'm still engaging with it. And I think there's this tendency that sometimes when people get, in all kinds of media and like in live action movies too, to just not be willing to, like, the suspension of disbelief, I guess. Mm-hmm. This is kind of strange, but there's this I've been watching a lot of The Witcher lately on Netflix, just rewatching it, a little holiday treat for myself. And I was watching a little behind the scenes documentary they had about it on Netflix. And during it, the showrunner is talking about how The Witcher as a season 1 has multiple timelines going on. And this isn't explicit to the audience. And she says something about how television audiences today are very savvy. So they didn't feel like it was a risky move to do something like that and not spell it out. And I was like, you're totally right. I love that. And then at the same time, stuff like this happens. And I'm reminded that a lot of people are not savvy about plot or about media and how media talks to us, I guess. I don't know. It's just really hard for me to imagine kind of growing up in this age and not being able to sort of follow along symbolically with where something is going. Or even like if I'm confused by it, to try to come up with some reasoning for why what happened. Mm-hmm. I don't know. There are certainly films that have come out where I watch it and I'm like, I think this is nonsense. I think the filmmaker had no point and is just making stuff up to look artsy. Like, yeah, I do that sometimes, you know, who among us doesn't? Yeah. But yeah, to just reject something that is happening on screen with no effort to kind of participate is very, like, what? I don't know. Yeah, it's either that or they're participating too much, or I don't know. We're just spiraling the drain of that idea. I'm not really sure where it goes, but I just want to point out I'm interested to see the director of that short, Domi Shi, I think is how you say her name. I believe she's doing Turning Red, which is the 2022 Pixar movie. Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned that. I have nothing to say about it except for I'm very excited. And the one image that I've seen of it is very compelling to me. Yeah. And I'm very into it. Me too. And I just like whatever sense of control she has over her storytelling, like that, just that story beat. I don't know. It says a lot to me about how mature of a storyteller she is to you have that concept be, you know, the mother-child relationship. It's very powerful in the short amount of time she's given to do something. And she gets a lot of emotions out of people. So yeah, I'm just excited about that. That's like a Pixar thing to look forward to. Just looking to the future, because we haven't really done as much of that as we have looking back. Wow. Yeah. So I guess people at the time loved this movie as much as The Incredibles almost. I mean, it seems when you just take a broad overview of reviews, people were kind of into it, I guess. Unless you... Yeah, I would say looking at the reviews that people loved this movie. Which I don't want to spoil the remaining contents of this episode for our listeners at home. But I find that very perplexing. I don't want to be mean to this movie. I'm going to try really hard to like walk an appropriate line where I'm being fair. Mm-hmm. But I don't remember what the approval rating of the first Incredibles was, but I'm sure it's in the 90s. I'm sure it's very definitely high. Mm-hmm. This one is 94%, it looks like, on Rotten Tomatoes, and I just don't get it. And what's interesting to me, so that's obviously the critic score. But I did another informal Twitter poll about Incredibles 2, as I had done with the first movie, to kind of just take like an audience temperature, my audience, I guess, I don't know, like some friends that I have on Twitter, just to see how people felt about it. And everyone across the board was, I thought it was, this was cool maybe, or that was cool in it, but very forgettable. Like no one had anything else to say about it except for that. And I was just like, I mean, first of all, I agree with you. And second of all, what happened that the critical response was so glowing? Well, I think it might be because I am on that side of things. Like in my mind, I am disappointed with what I was given. But I do have to consider, what was I actually promised? Because we've pulled out some, or at least I have, I don't know if you have. I pulled out some like Brad Bird comments because I just think it's funny when he talks. And he says, when addressing this movie, the movie will not reflect trends in the superhero genre since the first film's release. The most important mission of the first movie was to entertain the crap out of people. The second was, oh, we have some other things that we'd like to comment on. One of them is the role of men and women, fathers and mothers, blah, blah, blah.
So there's a lot of little things buried in the movie, but what does it promise? I guess just a good time. So if you don't really expect it to say anything, I guess give it a 94% rating because Brad Bird says it's not promising you anything.
I mean, he's not wrong. You know what's really interesting about that, though, and you and I have chatted about this a little bit recently. I don't think it was recorded, but I don't quite recall. I remember seeing this in the theaters, and at the beginning of the movie, there was a little segment from the filmmakers basically apologizing to the audience for how long it took them to make this movie. And I've never seen that before, and I've never seen it since, and I found it so strange seeing it. And it's not like I did understand it because obviously The Incredibles, people loved that movie. And I even remember when I saw The Incredibles for the first time, my dad, just in an offhand comment, was like, they're going to make a sequel to this one. Because Pixar hadn't made sequels really at that point. So there was Toy Story 2, but like they were known to not be interested in making sequels, ostensibly. And I was like, this is so interesting. My dad doesn't have any particular affinity for Pixar in general. And his gut reaction to The Incredibles was, this is so great. They're going to make a sequel to this. So it's interesting that there was clearly an acknowledgement of an expectation of a sequel and for that sequel to be worth waiting for so long. So I don't know. It does make me wonder, you know, are the subset of people who are critics, is there some particular reason why they just thought this was so good? And is it because they were waiting so long? You know, all of the critics loved the first one. And so them specifically, they were like, I cannot wait for the second sequel. Like, who was that message for at the beginning of the movie?
I guess it's people that interpret the ending of that first one literally. It's like, there's more to this story, even though to me, that ending of the first one is complete closure. It's like now they are a superhero team. The end, that journey is over of them finding their team. Yeah. Right? It's a story of like a team coming together. And to me, that's truly the end. I do not care what happens next. And I don't think there is anything to come next. And I think we're mostly right in thinking that because I'm not sure where this movie goes.
My cartoon feeling is that we didn't need this.
Okay. So some other little things just before we get too far into the specifics of the movie. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about sequelness. What does it mean to make a sequel and who's your audience when you're designing a sequel? And I guess I'm specifically thinking of this because I am actively making a sequel to something that I've made before. And there's a lot of, when you do that sort of thing, and I'm sure this is the case for any sort of creative project, you have to have somebody tell you what about the first one makes it worthy of a sequel. So I don't know, if you were to design a sequel to The Incredibles, Caitlin, what do you want from that movie to go forward into a sequel? Like, pretend you haven't seen the second one. Like, what do you expect? What would you want? Is that a tough question?
It's not. I have an answer ready to go for this.
Oh, okay, good.
Some of it has to do with what the content of The Incredibles and why, I guess I will just say, without diving too far into it right now, that The Incredibles 2 picks up literally the moment that the first movie leaves off. The Underminer pops up out of the city. They're at the track meet. They're at the arena. And that is Incredibles 2. Film opens. They are still there. That nothing has happened in between the first and the second, which I find absolutely inexplicable. And honestly, I do not understand why they did that. Was made.
Yeah.
I know that there's, I wonder if I can find this quote when we talk about it later. I know Brad Bird acknowledges this, and I just don't agree with the reasoning of why they chose to do that. What I was hoping for was a time skip, first of all. And I don't just mean, mechanically, I want things to be further in the future, but I want to know. So we've seen this family come together. You got two kids. They're young kids. Like one's a young teen. One's like a boy, in middle school or whatever, elementary school, and a baby. And then, two parents who are basically in the thick of parenthood. Like all of your children are very dependent on you. Show me a movie where Violet is in college, Dash is in his senior year of high school. Jack is a child doing stuff, you know, and you don't have to, like, maybe Jack's, some of his powers have gone away. I don't know. You know, maybe that's narrowed down, or maybe we're having a movie about Jack learning how to deal with these without being hampered by being a baby. Maybe it could have been a movie about Jack as like a processing, functioning, I was going to say adult, not adult, but, you know, not a baby, like someone who can think for themselves and talk and like, and consider trying to figure out what to do with this responsibility. That actually could have been a really cool parallel with the first movie being about Mr. Incredible trying to figure out what to do, like kind of how to rein himself in and when to not do that. Like it could have been like kind of the ultimate culmination of that story to have Jack, who has the most powerful powers, figuring out how to control that. And honestly, like he has a rage out power where he literally turns into a little goblin when he's mad. Like, how do you deal with somebody with all of these capabilities? That's like a nuclear level compared to any of the other like any of the superheroes. So anyway, I've basically written the movies.
Yeah.
Incredibles 3, I'm available. Wink.
Yeah, it is insane to just start the next day. Like it makes sense as it's a good opener because you're instantly back in the world that you were missing for 14 years. But it's the opposite choice you should make if you want to tell a sequel story, because if it's the same time period, then everybody's the same age in a Simpsons kind of way. And now it's more serialized than what a sequel should be. Right? It's everybody's frozen in time. If anything, you have to walk these characters back a little bit because they weren't allowed to grow in a way that you've kind of remixed the formula. You just are you still have the same formula of the original in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And that's essentially what you're saying gets to the exact heart of why I think it was a mistake. And, I'll see if I can dig up that Brad Bird quote because he specifically addresses this, but he basically said something along the lines of, you know, we made the first movie with these characters as they are for a specific reason. And with a time skip, all the dynamics change. And I'm like, yeah, yes.
That's good.
Exactly. And like, he didn't want that. Like, I guess he didn't want that. And the biggest problem for me personally about this movie not advancing is that we get to rehash the Mr. Incredible is a bad husband and kind of misogynistic and a little bit of a jerk again. And it's like so much worse. We're having already seen him go through this.
Yeah.
And his kind of pointed disgust at his wife having opportunities to do stuff while he has to stay home and take care of the kids is just incensing to me. I'm just like, why did you do this? Don't make me watch this again. Like, I don't know. Not great.
Right. Write him out of the fucking story, because when you flip it the other way, we don't watch in the story of like the 80s action hero masculine dude. We don't get to see what the wife is doing at home. They just leave. They're not in the story. So why the fuck are we watching him? Right.
Yeah, do we need another story about how men don't know how to parent, apparently, until and it's like, it is good. There are moments in that movie where it's actually kind of tender when he is doing a good job parenting. But I'm like, this is honestly a little unfair to guys, to dudes, just being like, you know, they just can't do it. He never cared enough, so he doesn't know how to do it. And I'm like, it honestly makes sense for the character even, you know, in the context of the story in the original movie, it does kind of make sense. It's just, we've seen this before. That's a tale as old as time. I've seen that story before. I've seen the husband have to struggle to learn how to like do parent stuff before, and I don't need to see it again.
And the only excuse I can think of for it, because I love the game of trying to figure out what they were thinking. I don't want to just be eye rolly or annoyed with something. I want to understand the choice these smart people are making. And I suppose it's the rule that this is literally a story from the 60s. It's not just a motif or a set design, but I guess we're just in the 60s, which the first one doesn't make clear. It's more aesthetic. I guess, you know, the tech is dated, but also that works for the plot. And it's like a thing a lot of stories do anyway. But maybe the politics of this movie and the first one are 60s politics to some degree. Is that an excuse for why Why make those choices? Why spend so much time with this dad in a story that in 2020 we're so tired of hearing?
It's just interesting to me because I feel like that worked for the first one.
Yeah.
And it is true for the first one. And that's not the only time that I feel that time setting holds this movie back. We'll get into this a little bit, but the whole plot with the screenslaver.
Yes. And
in particular, a monologue that this villain delivers kind of halfway through the movie is just, it's so puzzling to me. And it is to the detriment of this film. I think that it lives in this weird zone where it's made in modern times. It came out in 2018. It's set in this alt 60s. And so it's walking this weird line where you're sort of talking to both audiences. And if you have a villain deliver a monologue, you have to make it work in the context of talking to 60s people and modern people. And it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's digging its own holes, or I don't know, or nobody was saying no to Brad Bird, or, he has this vision of this world he wants to recreate. And then everybody just has to figure out how to navigate through it. And therefore, we just have a lot of questions about why this in the first place. And it's simply the answer is that's what Brad Bird wanted, I guess. Clearly, he's nostalgic for that era and time. And sometimes, I guess, is that all the excuse you need to do it? It's sometimes seems like it for some directors that have a lot of power, because he's wielding a lot of power when this comes out, right? I don't know. He's actually failed upward at a bunch of stuff. Like Tomorrowland could have been amazing, and it just is forgettable. What else? As
I mentioned, I think in the Incredibles episode, it's kind of funny, but I've barely seen Brad Bird movies. Like, I really haven't, so I can't speak to it.
Oh, well, Ghost Protocol's pretty fun. I don't know.
Yeah, and I've almost seen no Mission Impossible movies. I think I've seen the first one. Mm-hmm. And I've always wanted to see Tomorrowland, actually, because I'm curious. But I know going into it that it had that kind of lukewarm reaction.
It's kind of a bummer. Yeah.
Yeah. So I am interested. And honestly, for that matter, I need to rewatch Iron Giant because I've hardly seen it as well. And I like that movie, but I just have barely seen it.
Yeah. In
whereas
a lot of
with
ways,
most animated movies, I've seen them about 7,000 times.
Oh, man. He worked on Plague Dogs. I want to talk about that someday. Ooh. And The Black Cauldron.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to have to do that.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I think you and I both love a lot of stuff Brad Bird likes, but then there's on the other side of it, there's something fundamentally lacking that he's missing that is very important to us. So I think that's why we hover around him so much, because it's just so close, but so far in a way or something.
Yeah. And boy, does he have an eye for design and flair. And he does, as we're talking about, he works on really diverse projects in terms of content. I mean, there's a common thread between them in terms of action. But for example, making a Mission Impossible movie and making animated films for Pixar don't seem really that similar. So he has an admirable range. And this is sort of kind of looping us back to what we were talking about. But I do want to say, I don't know much about this, but I do know that something happened in the production of The Incredibles 2 that threw things off. I couldn't find the exact quote for this either, but I do recall reading at some point in my research that Brad Bird specifically mentioned having a lot of plot threads or ideas that didn't make it into this movie because they just didn't have time. And I also know, and this is kind of interesting, and I have to imagine very upsetting for a project runner for something like this to happen. But Pixar basically took a year of development time from them by pushing the date forward. So this movie was scheduled to come out when Toy Story 4 was supposed to come out. And instead they took Incredibles 2 and they said, actually, this is going to come out a year earlier. And you have to imagine that losing a year that you planned to have is going to cause big problems. So it's very unclear how much, that affected what The Incredibles 2 arrived as, but it certainly didn't have no impact.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I guess we should always be taking that sort of stuff into account, especially for these studios that plan things out so many years in advance. Once you get on the tracks with these projects, it's going, whether you have all the pieces you need or not or something.
Yeah, and it is wild, like you think. We love to talk about directors like they are just kind of masterminding everything and putting all the pieces into place and making all these calculations, but it is truly incredible. One of the things that's so fascinating about filmmaking is how easily a wrench can get thrown in that you have no control over. And it can come from anywhere. You know, it's a money thing or an executive thing or, you know, studio meddling is tales all this time, all of this stuff. And it's just wild. So yeah, you can go into a movie with the best intentions, have a great idea. And because filmmaking is incredibly collaborative, which gets to the kind of the greater point that I'll probably bring up for time immemorial, that directors don't deserve all of the credit for whatever they made. And I think studios could benefit from having a little bit more of like a teamsmanship energy in that kind of situation. But like, you just can't control how it comes out. You can't. And so I don't know, you know, I don't think it would be fair for anyone, including us, to just walk in and be like, Brad Bird, what did you do to make Incredibles 2 like such a weird sequel that wasn't that successful in our opinion? You know, I mean, we have to talk about his choices or whatever in the context of this, but yeah, at the end of the day, some of it is a little bit of a mystery.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's the reason to talk about it. It's the magic trick of how a movie gets done. It's like the unnamed people that pulled this off that we'll never know, the director who knows what they were thinking, the studio who stepped in, the money that came and went. Like, these are all just variables that we can't have answers for. And that's why it's fun to just sit and like speculate about it. Good times.
It was the best of times. Possibly.
Okay.
Can I interrupt really quickly? Because I did find that quote.
Yeah.
But he talked about, you actually quoted some of this when we were talking about The Incredibles when he was talking about the characters, and he said, you know, men are expected to be strong. So Bob is like super strong, and mothers have to be doing all kinds of different stuff. So she's elastic, that kind of quote. And he talks about the idea, all of these ideas change when you age characters up. Which honestly, I'm like, that's not a good enough reason. Again, like, a mom isn't only a mother, and so therefore only she can exist in this one context. Like, that is not how it works. But he specifically says, you know, all of these ideas change if you age the characters up. An insight into those periods of your life and those particular perspectives disappear once you age them up. I'm not interested in a college-age Jack. I'm just not. And in a way, I'm like, you know what? Every creator should be allowed to say, I just don't care about that. I think that's fair, but I just don't agree. I am interested in that. And I think not being interested in it made a lesser story at the end of the day.
Right. I don't think he was particularly interested in any specific thing, because as he said, and, you know, when I say I'm quoting somebody, I'm kind of like collaging phrases together. So we can take that with a grain of salt. But the points I'm getting, or the vibe I'm getting from him, is that it's like, hey, take it easy, man. I'm not trying to feed you some broccoli. This is all dessert. We're having a good time. Look, it's Disney. It's Pixar. You're here for fun. That's what you paid to get into the theme park for, right? It's all just,
he doesn't know us at all.
Yeah, but it's not. And that's not what Walt Disney would have ever said about anything he made when he was alive. So if you think you're speaking to the spirit of these studios by saying it's all for fun, that's not how you arrive at like an Epcot Center or a Snow White or any of the things the Disney studio did. So yeah, I also do not excuse the idea that it's all just for fun, because you should be pushing for better stories at all times. And to leave this sitting exactly where the last one picked up. And to also, something that's always bothered me, and it bothered me in the first one, is we really don't get a sense of these kids and their place in this story. They are really just along for the ride. And especially in this one, it's really just about the adults. So it's like, can't the kids that are coming to see this movie, that are being dragged along, that have to like listen to adults talk all day, maybe their parents are already fighting in the car ride over, and they have to come and sit and watch a movie about parents fighting? It's like, Jesus
like,
Christ.
No, I live this.
Yeah, it's like, oh, but wait, the one girl's invisible.
It's not that fun, actually. It's broccoli, actually.
But wait, the boy runs fast. But
I wish I could run fast.
Yeah. Oh, wait, now the dad's yelling again. And I mean, this one, if we're talking about making stuff for kids, which again is a thing that I do. And yeah, maybe I get a little resentful that I can't say what I want with my stories either. But these adults in this movie are fucking scary with the glasses. Yes. There's some scary ass shit in this movie that would not have flown in any other context than Brad Bird doing a Pixar movie in 2018. Like, you just can't do stuff like that in kids' entertainment in general, you know?
You're right about that. And it's funny because in a way, I feel like this movie really softballs that kind of stuff and also goes really hard in a way that, I don't know. It's ineffable, really.
Yeah. Okay. I want to do one talk about sequels before we like get into the plot. Because I wrote some stuff about what I think makes a good sequel. Can I go through it?
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, you have time?
No. Actually, okay. I do have to go. So
okay,
you shouldn't have said anything. I wasn't looking at the clock. But anyway, great talk. See ya.
I'll just keep going. So here's my thoughts on what makes a good sequel. I'm just reading off the document right now. A sequel to an adventure story, like we're getting here, should challenge and or recontextualize what the characters believe. So a great example of that is our favorite Toy Story 2, where in the first one, we say that the best thing to do is to be Andy's favorite toy. It's awesome to be like the hero of the bedroom. And then the second one poses the idea that, yeah, but what if you could be bigger than that? What if you could be an icon for the whole world? What if you were like part of a bigger story, which is something the Marvel movies always pose. So I feel like Incredibles 2, not doing that in any way. It doesn't make me ask the question, oh yeah, wow, I hadn't thought about that in the first one, which sucks. So a way they could have done that, which I assume we'll get into pretty deeply here, is just the villain in Incredibles 2 is lacking in a lot of ways. Maybe strong in some ways, but generally lacking. Correct. I mean, do you have quick thought on Villainy in Incredibles 2?
Yeah, very disappointing across the board because, not to spoil the movie, but there's essentially two villains that ultimately end up being the same villain. But in presentation, they're very distinct. And both of them are incredibly lackluster, in my opinion.
Yes. Whereas like Stinky Pete is a great villain because he poses the new perspective that lures Woody in to the whole problem of the movie, right? Like he entices by selling Woody on this new idea, which is great. And for a minute, you could be like, wow, I might make that same choice, which again, why that movie is great. Incredibles 2, no effort to really present a villain that poses a conflict for the hero on any level.
The best villain, I think we can agree, I'm sure we do agree, is one where you almost agree with them.
Yes.
That is
so
where
close.
Good villainy comes from.
Mm-hmm. The other side of that is to do the villain that's completely chaotic, right? Which is like the Batman Begins Dark Knight pairing where you have, it's a little bit of a cheat because I feel like Batman Begins is actually in Act 1 and then Dark Knight is the Act 2. So it's kind of a sequel, but it's really just the other part of the movie. But if you just because we're talking about superhero movies, Batman wants a sense of control and he becomes the hero Gotham needs in the first one. But then we learn that when you become that hero, you also create the other side of the coin, which is like the ultimate chaotic element. So have you made it worse? Have you improved things? And then that just changes everything there is to say about Batman, because now his pursuit is flawed in a way that the first movie doesn't offer, because we have this new element. So again, that's like the sequel saying, oh yeah, we got here in the first one, but now we're going to spiral into this new world. And then we're going to bring you to this whole new way of thinking. And I'm not just like saying this is a thing adult movies have to do, like kids movies can do this. And I just don't think The Incredibles even tries to pull off this strategy, which should just be like blue sky conversation early on, as far as I'm concerned. So that's my little rant about doing a sequel, again, because I just have been thinking about it a lot lately.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. If I can tack on some off the cuff thoughts, do not have a document prepared. But I think about this because a lot of movies, like I was just kind of skimming through my collection of digital movies and realizing how few of them are sequels and thinking about what makes a good sequel. And some of the stuff that I might talk about now, like Back to the Future is a good example to me. And I just want to asterisk this because if I'm talking about that in the context of sequels or the original Star Wars movies or something like that, I am blinded by just such a thick layer of nostalgia that it is kind of hard for me to divorce. You know, I've seen all of those movies since I was a kid over and over and over again. So they live in my brain forever. And it's hard for me to have a fully outside perspective. But for example, I think what makes all three of the Back to the Future movies work so well is that they're really different. This sounds so pithy in a way, but you took these characters and they don't. So, I mean, there are certainly callbacks, like throwbacks to, you know, the original little things, but they're tastefully done. I think that's an important thing for a sequel is that it can't just be like, remember us again, but maybe even more cartoonish than you remember. And for like taking the same characters and putting them in a new challenge, like a new situation, something fresh, and just something that makes it feel distinct. Like, I think, again, I mentioned being exhausted earlier by just having the same stuff over and over and over again. And some of that too is just like, I love the familiarity of characters that I love from a movie that I love, whatever. But I don't want to watch the same movie again. I really don't. I want to watch a new thing. I want to learn something new. You know, give me something where I can age with the characters. This is also stupid, but here's an example that maybe this isn't going to go anywhere. But recently, in my household, we rewatched the Austin Powers movies.
Ooh. Yeah, baby.
Oh yeah, let's get into that.
Okay.
Let's do it. And it was just kind of like, oh man, you know, I saw these when I was a kid and like I barely even really like got what they were about. Like, let's throw these on for old time's sake. And then watching all of them sort of back to back over a week or two. And the first one is legitimate. I'm like, this is funny and it's good. It's very referential, which is the whole point. Much like The Incredibles, it's referencing this very specific type of media in a specific era, with the whole, you know, British spy, James Bond kind of, you know, all of that stuff. And it has like an original story for what it is, but it's just a parody movie. And then the second and the third one are so referential back to the first one to the point that they joke about how heavily referential it is. And I legitimately think all of those movies are good and funny, for better or for worse. Obviously, there's like, you know, problematic aspects, whatever. But I was like, I kind of remember enjoying all of these equally when I was really young and stupid. And now I'm like, honestly, I really enjoyed the first one and the other two just don't feel as good. They're just not. And it's because
they're like victory laps or something.
Yeah, like, a little bit. And I'm like, that's fine, especially for movies that they're not an emotional investment by any stretch of the imagination. They're there for dumb fun. And I'm fine with that. And they don't pretend to be anything else. But it's interesting because like these movies are sequels. They are not that inherently interesting on their own. They don't exist without the first one. A good sequel should be a movie that could exist, or there's a nugget in there that could exist without the first one existing. And so maybe like in Back to the Future, that's a great movie. Classic story. Back to the Future 2, you could make an interesting movie out of the idea of somebody having to go forward in time to save the ruin of their family. Like that is an independent idea that stands on its own merits. Great job, sequel, done. And even Star Wars, I won't get into it a lot, but just for the original trilogy, they were super pulpy, you know, as pared down to like the hero's journeys you can possibly get in a story. But every sequel moved the plot forward. And that's it. You go to new places, you do new things, the characters learn new information in each movie, stuff happens. If you're just having the characters do the same thing again, I mean, which I guess you could use The Force Awakens as an example. It's literally just A New Hope again. That's the right one, right?
No, yeah, you're right.
Sometimes I name drop the wrong Star Wars movie when I'm like in the heat of the moment. But yeah, it is. It's beat for beat the same movie. And it was fine. But watching it, I was like, I see what you're doing. You're hitting everybody's nostalgia bone super hard on purpose. Yeah. And that doesn't make a timeless movie. It just doesn't.
Right. Exactly. That's the perfect example, especially if like I had a great time watching Force Awakens And yeah, and I saw it 3 times, and now I never need to watch it again. I don't even think about it ever. And I probably may never watch it again, because I know every time I put it on, it's just going to mean a little less, because it really doesn't mean much other than to just, strike that nostalgia bone, as you say. But that brings up the thing of, okay, yes, this is a sequel, but is it best? Could it have been something else? Like, could it have been a spinoff? Could it have been a serialized show if Disney Plus existed? Like, there's all these other questions that appear in my mind now that there's so many options for how you portray media. Like, would this have been a better graphic novel or a radio drama or something? There's so many ways to take your IP and keep cashing in on it over and over. And maybe it's not fair now to like say Incredibles 2 is part of the first movie. Like, it's actually all together. It means something more. Maybe Incredibles 2 is really just Incredibles, the direct to video version, even though it wasn't. But looking back now at the ways you can get stuff out there, it's like, well, this story doesn't deserve a full on sequel as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we get into the storiness of it?
I think we should. I think we've circled it enough times, so we need to swoop down and start pecking at the corpse, if you will.
We're crows. Scavenging
or
crows.
Or vultures, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. That seems harsh. One of the hardest things about talking about this movie I'm finding in the moment is, and I think most people will agree, I got this feedback a lot in my little Twitter poll that I conducted, but it's messy. This is a mess. There's just like so much stuff happening.
Yeah,
so it's kind of hard. And okay, comparing to Incredibles 1, which I'll try not to do too much so it doesn't feel totally unfair, because I do think, there's something to be said about that. But The Incredibles 1, it just felt so tight. There's just this linear progression of events that totally builds. Doesn't really feel like any of the scenes are like a waste of time or kind of adding unnecessary padding. It just felt like, the whole time I'm like, I'm watching the story. Everything is kind of making sense. And this one, it just feels so fragmented. A lot of it feels centered around set pieces, like action moments.
Totally. Well, what if we get you started with the inciting incident of this shutting down of like the super relocation program?
Yeah. And really, I just like to talk a little bit about the whole Underminer thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's just so, I don't have a focused point to make about it. It's so strange to me. It's strange to think like this is happening right after I don't know. I feel like this movie gets me started off on the wrong foot. It's so strange to see them all just out here on the streets fighting again so quickly, after the events of the first one. I didn't really realize that the Underminer, I feel like they did the Underminer dirty a little bit in a way, because he's just here to rob a bank, honestly. And his little speech that he gives at the end of The Incredibles is so colorful. He's just like, that line where he says, I'm always beneath you, but nothing is beneath me. Whoever wrote that line, you're a genius. You are so cool. And I love you personally. That's
another, not to keep hammering on the things this second movie is missing, but it has none of that writing. It doesn't have those kind of tongue-in-cheek characters. Like the Bon Voyage or something. None of the heroes in this do it for me in the way that the first one does.
No, the villains are very rote feeling. They're not memorable. And then the other superheroes, there's this kind of little conclave of superheroes at the end. And some of them have kind of cool powers, but none of them are really that interesting. It genuinely feels like it was just kind of a grab bag of superhero ideas, and they're just thrown out, and they're there.
So basically what the Underminer does is it just reminds us how good the first one was before we actually get into the second movie.
A little bit. And honestly, this is another thing that I think is hard to anticipate when you're making a movie, but was also a result of making the mistake of picking up right where we left off, is that if you end on a really colorful character on this cliffhanger moment with this really ridiculous personage of the Underminer, and then you answer, you follow it up with the answer to that. Like, this is the guy. This is what he's doing. I've had 14 years to think about what the Underminer's deal is.
It's true, yeah.
I've had a long time to consider that. I'm not saying that I have, per se.
But somebody has.
Somebody definitely has. And you're really, that's a hard needle to thread. I don't blame anyone for trying. Because again, I think hindsight, 2020. And how can you know? But I don't think he really lived up to the dirty, weird little mole man guy that I had in my mind. And like, he's probably going to try to take over the city or something. And instead he just wants to suck all the money out of a vault. And it's also weird to me how this movie kind of steps on its own themes a lot. And one of those things is, I don't have an answer for this, but after this whole Underminer fight, they have trashed the city. I mean, the Underminer's driving this giant drill through the whole city, just wrecking buildings, all this stuff. So the Incredibles get hauled in by the cops. And, they got some government guys yelling at them in one of these little rooms, being like, you look at all the damage that you've done. And if you just hadn't done that, there are systems in place for us to cover the damage. There's insurance, like, to cover the money that's been stolen, da 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 da. And I'm just sitting here being like, yeah, no, that's kind of a good point. Like, maybe, do we really need superheroes to be doing this? And I don't know, like, maybe people would have been at risk, but I almost feel like, I don't know. I don't have an answer again, because what are you supposed to do? Just let the Underminer take all the money and leave? Right, what are you supposed to do? But I do think, like, this isn't the individual's job to fly in and save the day. There should be systems in place to address these things, from a more regulated oversight, like, et cetera, kind of a thing.
It's true. It's the logistics of it that drag it down. That, again, like we were saying last time, it's the problem of taking these Pixar movies into the real world, because now we have to think about this stuff. If a movie is like letting your imagination run wild and spurring on ideas, this is some of the stuff that's going to pop into your mind if you're going to do a story this way. So yeah, it's kind of a drag. In fact, I think a lot of this, the relocation stuff, it's kind of a drag. Like some of this stuff looks great. I love where they're sitting by the pool. Just the look of that pool. I love a poolside conversation.
Oh, and it's so gorgeous.
But it's also kind of just boring. And I assume maybe that's why they put the Underminer stuff at the beginning. So at least we could watch something happen before we just watch these adults, like, get sad.
Yeah, and they have this big fight at the dinner table, and they're all living in a motel together after the destruction of their home at the first movie, and they're eating Chinese food. It's like they don't have anything. They have nothing. And actually, so this is a follow-up to a scene where Rick Dicker, excellent agent.
There he is. He's back.
Voiced wonderfully by Jonathan Banks in this movie, who was Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Because in the original, I just made a little note of this, in the original movie, he was voiced by Bud Luckey, who did a lot of stuff with Pixar. And he was the singing voice, if I'm not mistaken, of was it Jackalope from the Bounding short? Boundin'.
Wow, yeah.
But yeah, he's been around the block for sure, and was a great voice. But Jonathan Banks was just like excellent follow-up casting, because Bud Luckey unfortunately passed away before this movie came out. But anyway, he has just delivered the bad news of like, hey, we literally cannot afford to fund you anymore. Which honestly, it's another thing too. Like, just like we're saying, there's all of these points where this movie is like, think about this in realistic terms, which I don't want to do. I want to be able to suspend my disbelief for this. And now I'm thinking about how Bob has wasted millions of dollars of taxpayer money.
Right.
Kind of wreaking havoc, and then getting, we're going to move you to a new town, like new identities, a beautiful house to live in, da 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 da. This has clearly happened multiple times. And I'm just like, what a nightmare. Like, what a nightmare. That's not great. That isn't responsible behavior either, to be doing that. But anyway. It's
a weird setup for a sequel, because usually a sequel needs to feel bigger and better and to like bring up financial concerns in the middle, but then still move them into the cooler, bigger version of their house from the first one. It's just like a little, it's wishy-washy in the way, like you were saying, where this movie's just not streamlined. It's just kind of gray zone. Gray Zone's a good superhero name if they need another hero for the third one.
Yeah, he has the power of depression. I might be gray zone. You're totally right. At the end of the day, that's the biggest problem that we'll probably keep coming back to in this movie is that it doesn't say anything and it just feels like it's trying to have all of the cake and eat all of it too. Mm-hmm. And you can't. So yeah, really cool set pieces, but also everything just sort of feels like this happens because we need plot. So we need to like put them in dire straits. How do we do that? We take away all the money. And it's just a lot. It's just too much. Mm-hmm. And when they're having this dinner at the motel table and they're having this Chinese food and they're just yelling at each other. And I'm like, again? You're having the same fight again and it's the same. And it doesn't feel like in this nice way where they're paralleling something that happened in the first movie. This is just the same fight that he's yelling. Mr. Incredible is like yelling about how we should break the law if it's an unjust law. And I remember making a note here where I was just like, this is a really unfortunate situation, unfortunate scene, because on paper, I kind of agree with what he's saying. But when you think about it in the context of what he's talking about, like, how is you kind of putting people in bodily harm, putting your kids in bodily harm? Like, how is that helpful to anyone? How is that, or you're not taking any kind of concrete actions either. This just feels like the same kind of family political argument too, where people are arguing passionately about one way or the other. And I'm like, well, if you really feel that way, why don't you get involved? Like, why don't you be more of an activist or something? And like, you don't get the impression that Bob is out there, going to superhero legalization meetings, his local chapter of whatever. It just feels like he has really strong opinions about this and he feels like he should be able to yell about it, but that's it. And I'm just like, well, that's very bizarre. Like, don't you think if you had been marginalized in this way that you would be more passionate about it and maybe like take some concrete steps to better your situation? I don't know. It's just unsatisfying to me. I was like, I can't believe you're fighting about the same stuff. Okay. So as I kind of said earlier, this movie sort of starts off on the wrong foot to me through multiple scenes. The Underminer thing feels wrong. The kitchen table scene feels kind of weird and wrong. And then we start to get into like new plot, fresh plot. Incredibles 2 movie is happening. And that is when Frozone shows up to the motel and is like, hey, y'all, you need money. I know a guy and he wants to meet all of us. And he wants to pay us a lot of money for superhero stuff. Wink. Now, let's go. So they go and we get into it and we arrive at this giant, fancy, lot of money, expensive building where we meet these two characters. There's a brother and sister, and they are kind of the orchestrators of the overarching plot of this film. One of them does turn out to be the bad guy, but it's not who you think. And I do want to say quickly, at least the casting here is really good because Bob Odenkirk plays the brother, who is Winston Dever. And he's great because he's got that kind of sleazy salesperson energy. It's very obvious that the Better Call Saul character, there's a surprising amount of Breaking Bad vibes in this.
It's true. Whereas the other one was The Office, this is the Breaking Bad era movie. Yeah,
and you can't blame him for, going for that. And then I think it's Catherine Keener is Evelyn Dever. It's incumbent upon me at this time to note, legally I must specify that Evelyn Dever is the villain of this movie. And this is another thing that just arbitrarily frustrates me and is such a
God,
nitpick.
I just realized.
Her name.
The name.
Is Evil Endeavor. But something that irritates me about this that, like, we mentioned in Incredibles 1 that the name of the island is No Man is an Island. And it's like a little bit eye-rolly, but at the same time, I'm like, that's pretty good. And especially it's kind of good, I think, in hindsight, that they don't just come out and say that at any point. It just feels like this little bit of flavor that reinforces the plot, should you happen to put the pieces together. Yeah, it's cute. And I'm a little annoyed because Evelyn Dever is it's like a slant rhyme. Like, you could have just pronounced her name Evelyn. And I doubt anyone not be so pointed about it. And I'm so perplexed that they don't pronounce it as Evelyn.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, what? Like, I don't know. It's almost like if you're going to do a cheesy pun to just go for it. Otherwise, if you're winking at it too much, it doesn't, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, too many layers.
That's my unfair nitpick, honestly, if I'm being honest, of this little tidbit. But this is an interesting scene because it tees up. This is where it begins. Like, not only does the plot begin to this movie, it just sets up all the, the balls thrown up in the air that the movie will be juggling frantically for the rest of the time. But it also does weird things, like Winston has this proposition for Frozone, Elastigirl, and Mr. Incredible, and it's basically that for personal reasons that ultimately don't really matter the specifics of them, but for personal reasons, he wants to legalize superheroes again. He's very invested in that. And by doing that, he wants to publicly rejuvenate their image. So therefore, he's going to have them do superhero stuff illegally to improve how the public thinks about them and eventually, enact new legislation that will make them legal. Kind of, that's an interesting idea. He's an idealist. That's fine.
I guess, except that I almost fell asleep with you describing that because it's kind of, talk about show instead of tell. They have to set up so much in this first 20 minutes, and it's fun to watch somebody in a conference room. But there's the Steven Spielberg way of doing it at the beginning of Jurassic Park, where you get the silly ride and everybody's joking the whole time, and you get character flavor as well as clever exposition. This one, I just feel like it's a drag because it's all about money. I don't know if it's economic based. A movie that does that way better is The Mighty Ducks, where the people are actually struggling for money. The dad has to go to the hockey game. The dad has to turn down a double shift that he really needs. That's interesting. This need of money they have, what does that mean? They seem fine, right? They don't seem distraught really, unless I'm missing something. I don't know.
And when you're talking about needing money, you're talking about the Incredible family, right?
Yeah. Yes. The characters we're supposed to be invested in. What do they need? What do they want? Questions we ask of characters when watching a story. I'm just not really sold on them needing or anything.
Well, that's interesting because when I think about and how they set it up in the plot, I'm sure they do need money. They've got 2 weeks of funding per Dicker's kind of last thing. We can put you up in the motel for 2 more weeks and that's it. And I'm having to think maybe they got some savings or something. I don't know. But this is unfortunate. They don't have a home. They don't have work. What are they going to do? I don't really know. This does on paper, it's a problem, but you're right that it doesn't feel, there's none of that real human urgency of oh my God. If this was me, I would
just
be
not
able to sleep at night.
Exactly. Where's that shot? Where's because if you just kind of scrub through the frames of this, the hotel looks nice. It's not dirty. They have pajamas on. Everybody's happy. I guess the kids aren't stressed about school. Suddenly we're in this giant new beautiful house. Everybody's got a new outfit on. Where is the visuals that remind us what it's to need?
It seems like a weird, there's no desperation and it's not, I don't know. I don't personally crave seeing people put in desperate situations. It's just that would maybe make more sense. And you're raising a great point, which is that the motivations for pretty much any character in this movie just aren't that believable. The motivations for the villain are not believable to me. And even the motivations for Winston Dever is this character who ultimately is just kind of a hapless dude. And his whole pitch, his whole reason for being passionate about legalization of superheroes is that his father was very passionate about superheroes.
Right. Another degree away, right?
Yes. And so this is interesting because you were talking about, showing and not telling. And it's funny because this movie tries to do that in the wrong way by having this flashback sequence where you see the dad and you see that he's kind of this wealthy man and he puts these hotlines directly to 2 different superheroes in his house. And when superheroes become illegal, there's a breaking and entering situation and he gets murdered because he tries to call the superheroes and his hotlines are no longer active because the superheroes are illegal now. And so that's the whole thing. And I'm you're right. This is so overwrought. And am I supposed to believe? It's so not believable to me that the hotlines would be inactive, even though it just feels, I don't know. It's just hard for me to even care.
Yeah.
Honestly.
It's hard to believe, hard to care.
that's such a bummer to note, but it's true. It's just like, I don't really care about this dad character. You're basically just telling me like, you really loved your dad really loved this, so you really loved it. And I'm just like, it doesn't feel personal. So I don't really care about Winston as a character, don't really care about the dad. And then I ultimately just don't really care about his motivations. Mm-hmm. So then I'm starting to not really pay that much attention to Winston Dever. And, yeah, it's just like, okay. And this is funny because we've spent so much time meandering over this that like the original thing I wanted to point out about that scene is that he goes on this whole spiel about how we need to put body cams on superheroes, so that we can show the people, you know, what it's like from their heroic perspective. And I'm like, yowza. All right, year of our Lord 2018, let alone 2020, honestly. So it's aged poorly. That's a spicy topic. Guess where that goes? Absolutely nowhere. It's hardly mentioned again. It's a throwaway plot thing. And it's just so frustrating because I remember sitting at that point and being like, oh, okay, where is this going? Nowhere, it turns out. Nothing to say about that. Very frustrating to me.
Well, to be fair, Brad Bird did say this movie's full of a bunch of random shit that doesn't add up to anything.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
I guess who are we to complain? Like he did say that. He did say there's a bunch of nuggets. Like
just I don't know. It just feels like you're playing with forces
cut that
you
shit.
Shouldn't be.
Yeah, and don't forget your movie is already 2 hours, so maybe we didn't need that extra.
Yeah, this is
extra piece.
Unnecessary. So yeah.
Oh, can we get?
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to get to the bike, unless you have something before the bike.
No,
but I think the bike is very cool and fun.
I do not. I would like to say, yeah, it's nice, fleetingly, and it's not good enough. But it's nice that Elastigirl gets a little bit more time to shine in this one on her own merits.
Right.
Yeah, as you say, she gets this cool motorcycle. And honestly, it is cool. And one of the best set pieces, I think, in this movie, in a way, is a scene closer to the start of the movie where she's riding this elasticycle through the city and doing all these like cool tricks and stuff. And thematically, it doesn't matter at all, but it's just fun.
Yeah, it's another one of those scenes that you're like, oh, somebody drew this in the concept art. And this is kind of the fun of being an animator, is getting to do one of these scenes. But it just sucks that we have to go through this exhaustive setup to get this woman on a cool bicycle. It's like, hey, what if we just started here?
Yeah.
You got to make all these reasons for her to get a cool bike. You got to give her like, you have to give her this secret villain who's actually trying to be her friend, who has a brother who's doing this thing. And it's because they don't have any money and they were super secret relocated again. Like, but now you can have a bike. It's like, just start with the bike.
You can have a bike, which, by the way, doesn't make it out alive of the movie either. I'm pretty sure it gets exploded at some point. But the worst part, all that you said, totally valid, totally real. The worst part is that this movie still can't help Mr. Incredible being like, I hate this. I hate that you're going to have fun. I hate that you are successful. Yeah. And I'm like, get him out of my face, please. Because in this moment, he's like, all right, when do I start? I am so ready to be doing superhero stuff again. And Winston Dever's like, you are kind of a wrecking ball, which is 100% correct, Winston. You are accurate. And he's like, I think we need to give Elastigirl this shot. She's, for all these like appealing to the public, whatever. She doesn't kind of have this reputation of wrecking stuff that you do. And Mr. Incredible stands up in the room and is like, yeah, totally. You do a great job. But like what, Bob? Like, what? That means that you should have this and your wife, who's totally capable and qualified, shouldn't have it. What are you saying? And he doesn't say, and it's infuriating to me. And just the fact that he hates giving up anything and giving Mrs. Incredible any kind of moment to shine. I'm just like, get out of here, man. I'm done. Like, be gone.
I know.
Do some parent studying. Stop. Just stop. And I don't know. It's a lot.
No, you're right. It's a drag.
Yeah. And it bums me out. I'm like, let me love Elastigirl for a minute. Just let me do it.
Yeah. Well, you get about a minute and then just back to him at home.
Yeah. Struggling. And I made a note at this point too. And he's like reading this little like knockoff Dr. Seuss book or whatever to his kid. And I'm like, that's cute. And there are moments where And that's like, I just want to see Mr. Incredible be a good dad. Is that too much to ask for? Like, I'd much rather him have a little B plot where he's just like being a good dad and being cute. And those moments are the moments where I soften towards him a little bit. But
yeah, no, it's all good. It's just sort of like you could see another version where it's more about Helen, and we don't spend so much time with just watching him fumble around the house in the most obvious ways somebody could fumble around the house.
Yeah. Again, seen
and
it
fumble
before.
through like teaching math and all this stuff. All these like, is Brad Bird like hitting on, why is he throwing these like little issues like, oh, the changing of the math curriculum or the body cams? Like, why all these little beats that really just kind of spur these ideas in the adults watching the movie, like things pulled from the news? Why?
Yeah. Can I pinpoint...
in a movie set in the 60s?
Well, actually, this is really interesting because I didn't know this, but the new math thing did happen at that time. Because I
is that from that era? Okay.
Yes. Like I literally was sitting there thinking like, oh, you're going to take a shot at Common Core because that was really popular at the time. I don't know anything about Common Core, so please don't at me about this. I don't have kids. Like I don't really know what the story was with that. But people were very up in arms about it, for better or worse. I don't know. And I thought the same thing. Like, oh, he's just taking a shot at this. And I do think they're related. I think that's probably why he included this in this movie for whatever reason.
Yeah,
but apparently
fair,
new math in the 60s was a thing similar to Common Core.
Okay.
So that was very interesting to me. Fun fact that I learned from The Incredibles 2. So can't say that didn't teach me anything.
It doesn't really teach the characters anything. It just sort of like comes up. I guess it's a way for him to connect with his son a little bit.
Yeah. Like another thing that I actually thought was kind of a tender moment is that he ends up staying up super late to learn the math.
Yeah.
And then he wakes he wakes Dash up early so we can help him finish his assignment. And I was like, cute parenting scene. I mean, obviously it's unfortunate that you had to do that. But I didn't hate that part, And
okay, fair, yeah.
It does. I agree with you though that like ultimately our complaint is like a lot of this feels like it doesn't feel natural to the characters. It feels like contrived situations to drive certain things, and I do feel that. But I think this is why, and we've you and I have been talking back and forth about this, just kind of like grousing about it without coming to the conclusion that at least our philosophical take on storytelling is that it needs to be derived from some kind of pure source. And meaning, at least for me, and I think for you, and based on all of our kind of shared issues with this movie, is that to us, the best stories are stories that are saying something, and the clearer they can say that, the most concise that they can say that, and the most emotionally impactful way to say that idea, that's what makes the best stories. And so
agreed.
I guess that's kind of why The Incredibles is not my favorite Pixar movie, but it is really good and people responded to it because it did have this essence of purity in that. So yes, at the end of the day, it's kind of espousing these weird ideological things that are kind of concerning, but it also isn't very clear one way or the other. That's an issue with the movie that I think we both have, and I think is legitimate. But it also works because it's a send up of 60s action, superhero spy stuff. And it's a perfect send up to those things. It was made by somebody who clearly loves those things. So he hews to them closely and is employing all of just like Brad Bird's powers of storytelling and like cinematic knowledge to make something so that, again, it came out streamlined. The scenes all work. There's no fat. And that is what made it a good movie. And, whether or not it's your favorite movie has a lot more to do with like personal preference or issues with any of these little flaws that we found in it, whatever. And then if you have a movie that is just a total mess and it's not saying anything, like I personally can't. Even if a movie is saying something that I find questionable, if it's cohesive and concise and compelling in any way,
right,
I'm a lot more inclined to be into it. This is going to be a total freaking grab out of nowhere. But like I was watching John Wick 2 recently. So just thinking about John Wick, and it's really funny because those movies are so ridiculous and I just genuinely love them. And because it's just, those movies are like, you know what? We're going to make the best action movie and it's just going to nail it. And they do. And it's
they're super confident.
Good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like, I totally understand if some people don't like those movies. That's fine. But it's like, all it is like, we're going to make the fucking coolest shit you've ever seen in terms of action stuff. And it's going to be tight and it's going to be awesome. And that is enough for me. Like, that's enough for me. I'm just invested. I'm happy. And honestly, I think the third one wasn't that good because it starts to introduce some weird stuff and like starts to kind of play around with the plot. It gets a little too far into the world building.
Right. Agreed.
So yeah, at the end of the day, like, it doesn't really matter what you're saying in a lot of, I mean, it definitely does matter what you're saying. But to tell a compelling story, to like have a good and solid story, you just need to be saying a thing and leverage your resources to say the thing.
Agreed. Yeah, like stay in a lane. Incredibles 1 pretty much stays in a lane, whereas this one, it's just kind of swerving every once in a while, and it's just making you kind of nauseous, and it makes it take longer to get to the end. Yeah,
and then again, if you're walking out...
So it's like all these little tangents.
If you're walking out of a movie and you just don't know what the point was, that's a problem. For some people, it works too. And that's why I made a point to say, I think this is like our philosophy on storytelling. Because I don't think there's any right... I don't know. There are movies that come out that are very bizarre to me and I can't quite follow. And for some people, that's their favorite thing in the world. And I think that's fine. And it makes sense. And I wouldn't argue with it, but it just doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I mean, it might be enough to carry you through a scene to just be able to look at, you know, like Mr. Incredible reading to Jack and seeing the wallpaper and the lighting in the room and the kind of faux Dr. Seuss book, like all those visuals might validate that scene for someone. And that's totally fine because all that stuff looks great and it's executed better than other departments' choices and responsibilities towards the movie. So like we're picking on the stuff that is a problem for us, but like at the same time, there's like amazing stuff being done by other people because again, collaboration.
Yeah. And actually, so I hope it's cool that I'm skipping ahead. I don't know how chronological we're going to be about this movie at the end of the day. And
jump to the most interesting thing.
But this reminded me of that. When I think it's like the most successful scene, and a scene that I really enjoy still is the Jack versus the Raccoon scene, the showdown.
Okay, here we go.
Which is something that comes up a lot when I ask people about this movie. A lot of the time they're like, Jack was hilarious. The Raccoon thing was funny, and that's it. And like, I've forgotten the rest of it. And it's funny because I actually think taken as like a microcosm of this movie, the Jack versus Raccoon scene is exactly what I was just saying about storytelling. It harkens back to the old sort of Looney Tunes escalation of madness thing.
Yes.
So there's a formula here, and it's just, here's the bad guy, it's the raccoon, you know, sort of. And here's the protagonist is Jack, and they are going to fight. And this, honestly too, it's just there to be entertaining. It's exactly what Brad Bird wants. It's there to be fun and for you to enjoy seeing it. And it does, but because it's so simple. So it's not, there's no muddling of, there's no like, should Jack be, that raccoon could have rabies. Let's pause for a moment and consider that. There's no, you know, muddying of the waters. It's just like, here's a conflict. Here are the two parties.
Right.
And go. And we'll see how it plays out. And it's funny and just, it's a fun showcase of the cool, weird stuff that Jack can do. And then it honestly has a perfect culmination in finally showing Mr. Incredible that his baby has superpowers, which is just so wild to me that we've gone this long. Right, because until
now they've...
without him knowing. Right. To be totally honest too, I thought it was obvious at the end of the first movie that he had powers, and I thought they knew that, but they totally don't.
Me too. But apparently they they needed this scene to have that ending.
Yeah.
Where he finds out. Yeah, this scene, I mean, this to me is what the movie should be, but the way the movie is, it stands out because there's like a tone shift, and then it's just this segment that can pretty much be pulled out of the movie and be its own little, you know, Pixar short. It could have just been a short, I would think. I mean, it doesn't need what comes before or what comes after to exist. And I love it. And it, again, I come back to like, well, why can't we see more from the kids' point of view? Why can't we have more fun and elastic adventure with this movie? It's just, I just don't really understand what they thought they were what, you know, again, like we were saying, what is your responsibility to the viewer? Like, what do you think it means to entertain an audience or capture their attention? Like, why so much logical plot?
Yeah. And really, honestly, it's just, I don't know how many people think this when they're watching this movie or can relate to it, but just like seeing Bob struggling and being so angry and upset, it makes me sad. It makes me sad in the way that I was when I was a kid and you don't have control over your circumstances. And I don't like feeling that way. And I don't like thinking about that. So I don't understand why so much of the movie is taken up with this, that it feels hopeless. And it's not hopeless. Like, he learns to be a better dad, but we spend so much time on that. And it just, like, I don't know. That's a lot. There's so much darkness underlying that. That's not a household that I really would have wanted to be in, I think. It freaks me out.
No, it's quite dark and cold, which I guess, you know, maybe all these things are kind of the point. I mean, I guess maybe all of this is to say their pursuit of let's do this for the money is the wrong direction. You know, it's the wrong way to get what you need. But again, what do they need? And where do they arrive at the end? Like, I don't even remember, actually. Did they get back to their house? They just get, not to jump to the end, but I'm just trying to see how all this, you know, direction adds up.
I have no idea. I don't know where their circumstances end. I know that superheroes do get legalized at the end, though, I believe. And so one would have to think that maybe that's just their profession again at the end. But I don't actually know how it ends. Yeah,
they got their job back. It really is all about people and their jobs, which I mean, is there a bigger, you know, purpose? Like, is this I mean, this is a job. It's nice to have a job, but maybe you could have been a writer. I don't know. Mr. Incredible.
Mr. Incredible dad. Maybe. Do a better job.
So I just like to point out they do an amazing job with making him look progressively tired as time goes on. Like, his eyes get darker. And, you know, that's all very impressive. And I do love seeing that in the theater. And I'm going to just take a break from just being the wet blanket on this movie and say, like, all this stuff is inspiring to me amazingly. Like, I practice drawing people looking tired and happy and sad. I don't think a story needs to be one type of emotion or the other. So I do love to watch this stuff because it's fun to just watch artists figure out how to dive into these complicated emotions with, you know, the technology that's given to them. So I would say that Bob's tired face is an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, if we want to have a little positivity corner in here, which I'm very into, and I can't believe we haven't really talked about this yet, but this movie looks unreal. Like, it looks ridiculously good, and we all know that, but that doesn't mean it's not worth repeating. And especially night and day in comparison to the original, which doesn't look bad considering how, like, you know, when it was made. Some of this feels as real as it can for a cartoon universe. There's a clip when they're on, I think Elastigirl is on this private jet with Winston. They're going to the city where she's going to ride around her Elasticycle. And the sky is, you know, it's like sunset and the clouds are all illuminated, just like this beautiful fuchsia pink. And it's just like, oh my God, like, how are you doing this? And the hairs on everybody's bodies are just gleaming and individually represented, and every fiber. But it also doesn't feel like too much, you know, where sometimes you can get that uncanny valley of like, you did too much realism. Like, I feel like The Good Dinosaur had that issue ultimately, where the characters are very simple and cartoony, but the world was so hyper real that it was a little jarring. And this one, it's just like, you made The Incredibles 1, but it looks fantastic. And just, it truly is unbelievable to me.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. I think that's why it goes unmentioned, because it just works perfectly. That we just aren't seeing it because it's like the complete picture. Like all the pieces come together just right. It's playing off the colors and shapes from the first one, but also building on that logic. Like when we see the new characters, the new heroes that become the villains that return to be the heroes again, like they do look like they're part of this world. Maybe, well, actually, you know, maybe that's not true. Okay, maybe I'll take that back, because you did kind of point out, and I think you dropped this last time, And I'm just jumping to a part where we introduce the secondary heroes. Who do we have? We have Void and like, what's his name? Crushinator or something?
Crush Hour? Crush, I don't know. Crush something.
Oh, Crush Hour. Yeah, it's like, okay.
And there's
Reflux.
Owl Boy. I don't know his name at all, but he's an owl, though.
Yeah. Anyway, everybody knows who we're talking about, clearly. But I think you brought up a good point that they feel a little, overall, a bit more cartoony than the Incredibles themselves, which I think lessens the threat of them and also makes them not as sympathetic when they get like mind warped and stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think I mentioned them in the context that there's no way any of them have like secret identities, which is because they're so over the top and so distinctive that I'm like, how is Reflux supposed to just walk amongst humanity and nobody is like, what? I think you might have superpowers. Or an owl guy. Like, you are literally just an owl man.
And isn't that kind of the point of a lot of this, is the supers are supposed to be able to exist in the world. So if you're going to make odd looking characters, don't we need to talk about, the quote unquote normal humans' response to these characters that don't fit in with their worldview? Well, and like, that doesn't come up.
Not only are they supposed to just live in the world and be fine, they have to and can't demonstrate their powers. Like, they cannot be. One thing I do find interesting, and it's another kind of dropped questionable thread in these movies, is how illegal are superheroes? Because sometimes the reaction of Helen, for example, to be so nervous about it, or like Dash being forbidden to compete in sports because he can't reveal his superhero powers. And I'm like, what does that mean? Does that mean that if people know he can run super fast, he will be imprisoned? Or does it just mean he can't use it to do vigilante crime fight? Like, what is it? It's never clarified. So it's very unclear to me.
Right.
It sort of treats them as these like marginalized characters, but at the same time doesn't say what that means or how people actually feel about them. Like the X-Men, it's the same kind of situation, but at least in the X-Men, it's like people are like, oh my God, like I'm treating you like that was a much stronger parallel to, you are the other and therefore you're wrong and like I'll disown you and like stuff like that. And in this, it's very unclear how it works.
And that's why I keep getting hung up on it. For anybody that wants us to just move on with it and stop getting caught up in this sort of idea. It's like, X-Men have been doing that forever. Like Chris Claremont in the 80s, when I was 9 years old, I was picking up those comics and they were dealing with these issues. So I will continue to ask the question, why can't this movie address some of this stuff? Because technically, as far as I'm concerned, it's for a similar audience as those comic books were at the time. And they would juggle those things. Whereas this movie sort of just doesn't. It throws these like things around and asks you to believe this world, but then doesn't kind of show you how this world would really respond to some of these characters.
I think this is the one part I think that really put me over the edge with this movie and with that kind of this whole attitude. And it's a scene in this movie where Void, who is kind of a tragically underused character, honestly, and she's voiced by Sophia Bush, who I love as someone who really cherished my time with One Tree Hill back in the day. It's always a big fan of Sophia Bush. And I think she does a great job. And she has cool powers. And she has really cool hair. Anyway, there's a scene in which she approaches Elastigirl and she's like, gushing, I'm such a big fan. Like, you're such a role model for me. And she asks her, how do you balance work and life? And Elastigirl goes, let me just answer that question. Wait a minute. I got to go do something in the plot. Bye. And then never revisits the conversation. And I honestly, I'm offended by that. Nothing else in this movie will I say that ultimately I'm like, wow, this feels personal. But that just feels like such an insult. If you're going to act like you don't have anything to say, or you don't want to say any particular thing, then why? It's like you're baiting me. Like, why are you saying that?
I think, boy, are we just going to say a bunch of things that that character, Void, I feel she is, I don't like the way they write her for exactly that reason you're pointing out. They're kind of making fun of her in a way to have her just drop those sort of lines. And like you're saying, have them be brushed off as jokes, like actual concerns of people, the things that give depth to the character. Like it's like they're just kind of rolling their eyes at her. It's like, this isn't a real question somebody asked. This is just a type of person you see on the internet or something.
Yeah. Yes. It feels aggressive.
Right? I don't know.
And it feels aggressive towards people who maybe see Helen Parr and think, yeah, she's really getting a raw deal in this whole situation. And then to just overtly bring it up like that and be like, it's not worth answering. I'm just like, no, like you've lost me a little bit. That's like a little bit of a line that I'm not cool with, because this is an actual problem for people in the world. And like Helen could be such an iconic character for women. And weirdly, I feel like she's not. And it might be because of stuff like that. Like through no fault of the character, but because of how she's treated and contextualized. Ooh,
right. It's like,
I get mad about it.
She's being presented in a certain way, but when you actually follow her story, it doesn't add up in the right way. And I mean, I'd say Rey in Force Awakens and that whole trilogy is the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's like you're giving us this hero, but you're actually not giving us a hero where we can really sink our teeth into and relate in a lot of ways. And I mean, I like the character of Rey, but when you really try to add up the story, and it's the same thing with Helen here, it just doesn't quite add up to something you could really like feel great about.
Yeah, she never has like a moment of triumph. She never really is given the credit that I feel that she's due. And it's never going to sit right. It just feels like such a missed opportunity. I don't know. Also,
if we're talking about pairing a hero and a villain, which is like kind of how we started this, Evelyn, the stakes aren't as high here. First of all, at the end, she doesn't die. Syndrome gets killed. The situation he's created for himself is just so much more compelling than the weird thing that happens with this plot. And I think just the simple fact that, not to jump to the end, but we're just sort of on this thread about what it means to be like Helen, the hero of this movie. Evelyn gets taken by the cops, and she also even has a moment where she like says something nice to Helen. What does she say? She's like, oh, she thanks her for not letting her die or something. So it's like, oh yeah, they're still friends, kind of. They still like understand each other, which is maybe good, but also you gave Mr. Incredible a true villain, mm-hmm. and you give Helen this sort of like polite villain who's, I don't know. You tell me if I'm saying something stupid.
I don't think so. I think it's weird because she's such so disappointing. Again, the whole Evelyn Dever thing. She's not a good villain. As Screenslaver, she's not a good villain. And so it's hard to have a conclusion because it just feels like you're working with something that's half done. It's not done. And so, yeah. And I think that in itself is a disservice, ultimately.
Yeah.
So she's not a compelling villain.
She does have a couple good scary scenes that are worth talking about when we get there. But yeah, like, again, I just say it just doesn't really add up doesn't add up. It's like they have too soft of a touch with how they deal with her for whatever reason.
Well, and so here's what's so bizarre. I do want to say, too, it just feels like a waste of Catherine Keener, who did a really good voice job, but
yeah, totally.
Anyway, what is interesting to me, and I do think we should run back through after we finish this line of thought to just talk a little bit about Screenslaver, who we've kind of skipped over incidentally, and to catch and get back up to sort of where we're at now, closer to the end of the movie. Mm-hmm. But her motivations are so bizarre, and in a way they're chaotically evil. And at the same time, she still ends up coming out as this toothless sort of soft villain, which is so bizarre to me, because her ultimate villain plan is to launch the largest cruise ship in the world into a populated city. Mm-hmm. Because she thinks that superheroes are dumb. Like, there's nothing about her motivation, So this is why I'm going to take a brief detour, skip back to the front part of the movie where we have that whole scene where Winston Endeavor is like, my dad loved superheroes, so superheroes should be alive again. Well, secretly, unbeknownst to us, Evelyn Endeavor is stewing because she thinks superheroes are dumb and her brother is overly sentimental and she doesn't want them to be legal. And actually, she blames them for her dad dying. She blames her dad's reliance on superheroes for being what caused him to die. That makes sense, honestly. That's like a believable grudge.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
not believable to me that would make you so unhinged that you're willing to annihilate probably hundreds of thousands of people off the face of the planet because you are feeling spicy about that. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, there's other ways to sort of address this concern you have. There's, career paths you could follow. But yeah, they really don't give a reason for her to go, I don't know, mad or whatever in that way to become a villain. And we sort of talked about this with Syndrome too, like the way they design Syndrome, the way he looks a little odd, or he doesn't quite fit the mold of like the Incredible family's kind of picturesque, nuclear family ideal. It's a very different approach. And that movie was 14 years ago. So they're just not going to do a villain like that. They're going to make a more grounded, real villain, but also still make her comic booky mad in a way. I'm trying to even be politically correct about this fictional character, which is weird, but I think
it's never bad to be politically correct, in my opinion. But I get what you're saying.
I'm sure. Like she has to be more grounded for some reason, which is why she becomes, I think, a little more toothless because they can't allow for an absurd character like they had in the first one, I guess.
You got to be comic book insane, like comic book villain type of insane to do something on that level, to do an act of violence so large. And yet she seems very mellow and rational-ish because, again, I don't think her motivations really make sense to this degree. It just doesn't, she doesn't make any sense. And then I'm annoyed by it because I'm like, why is she so chaotic, but also just like sort of annoyed about superhero? I don't know. Well,
let's get into her alter ego a bit then.
Yes, I do think we should talk about. Tell me your thoughts about Screenslaver.
I mean, it's a cool design. Again, if the director has directed me to see this as a movie set in the 60s and the sort of collective dread of screens, man, they're taking over our minds and we're just like a bunch of insects roaming around and there's someone behind the scenes telling us what to do. Okay, I like that sort of thing. And I love when she breaks into the room and there's all these like green screen things and the seizure inducing lighting effects and all that stuff. It looks fucking awesome. And I think the scene is well directed, but does the character mean anything in the bigger picture? No, it doesn't really relate to who the villain actually is. It's just like a cool disguise. And also it's saying something that's so dated that I don't even know if a kid would even know what the fuck the point is other than spirally eyes look cool. That's my take.
I think this movie, The Incredibles, it just doesn't really come up as much, but I think this movie does a disservice to itself when it draws attention to the time period, because obviously the aesthetic of The Incredibles as a franchise, as a universe, draws inspiration very heavily from the 60s, and it's supposedly set in this alt 60s. But even when you're watching it, I was never thinking, oh, they don't have the internet or whatever. I was just living in the world, so I'm not thinking about that. And then in The Incredibles 2, they sometimes are like, this is kind of the past, and they draw attention to it. And during Screenslaver's very strange monologue, he's talking to the audience he like hijacks this TV host's brain. And so he's speaking to all people everywhere. And is like, you love entertainment, you love to be safe at home, but you still want to consume all this stuff and you're soft and blah, blah, blah. And there's a line where it says like, you don't play games, you watch game shows. And I was like, huh? Because like, obviously game shows still exist today, but it was just such a dated feeling statement. that it sounded like somebody was like, and when you want to watch a movie, you go to Blockbuster. And I was like, yeah, like what? And then
like, is there no interactive media in this world, I guess? Is that what it's saying?
And I'm like, you got like magnet train, like monorails, but you don't have,
right.
You still watch game shows. I don't know. And like, maybe you do have game shows, but just, it was already dated enough feeling you rant to me about how everybody's on their phone all the time, essentially. And I'm like, yes, that's true, but like, what do you have to say about it?
Just pointing it out. Yeah.
Yeah, it just feels so bizarre to me. And I'm like, well, you're not talking to me. I mean, you are really, I guess, you know, but just doesn't feel like, I don't feel compelled by that. I'm not, you know, I can't wait to see what the villain has to say. I feel like I already know what the villain has to say.
So do you think that's intentional? Are we supposed to, I mean, obviously, just in terms of building a plot, you have to escalate. So you can't have this villain actually be as dangerous or interesting as the villain that will be revealed next. Do you think that's part of why it's written in such a silly way? But they take it so seriously. It's hard to believe.
Yes, they play it so straight. I will say, I think you are supposed to believe that Winston is the one behind everything because it makes sense. Mm-hmm. It makes sense for, you know, his whole motivation to set up a conflict so that superheroes can succeed. So that makes sense. And the whole twist is like, actually, the villain is real and he doesn't want the superheroes to succeed. And it's a lady and it's Evelyn. I think, you're supposed to kind of see the cracks maybe a little bit to be like, this is obviously a put on. Like, it's obvious that it's a show.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's supposed to be believable enough. And it's not really. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that this isn't a real situation.
Exactly. And just to go back to the roundabout long ass way we have to go for like a woman to play a certain type of role is, okay, in the first one, Syndrome is the bad guy. We see his origin story at the beginning. About halfway through, we meet him as the villain, and then we follow him as he gets more and more out of control, and you almost can't deal with him, but luckily the family comes together and saves it. This one, we have to watch a whole movie about all kinds of stuff and all kinds of like misleading things to find out that the bad guy is the other lady. Like, is a movie that's probably written by a bunch of guys. I just wonder, like, could you shorten this movie? Could you have got rid of the brother? Could you have just made her revealed as the screensaver and had an interesting plot without like these misleading things? I just got to wonder that. Maybe not, but also maybe.
I don't want to harp on this too much, but as I was complaining about earlier, there's like an unwillingness to show us Helen's point of view that I find very sad. And the friendship that she appears to be forming with Evelyn, they have this is like one of my favorite scenes in this movie, I think. But there's a scene where they're in the office. They've just had this little superhero party where you meet Void and Reflex and all the other superheroes. And then Helen and Evelyn are sitting and hanging out and just chatting and like drinking and just like kind of vibing together, honestly. Mm-hmm. And there's like the soft music in the background and like honestly, that scene is so subtle and has like great atmosphere, and it sort of transported me to similar situations in the olden days when we had parties and could just hang out with people like that. So that's such a subtle moment. I really love it. And they're literally just bonding over being women with responsibility and, you know, having to do stuff and having a certain level of power or authority.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's something there. And it's the only taste you get of what it might be like, of Helen to have somebody in her life that is similar to her. Not the same, but, you know, that they have this commonality.
Exactly.
And then it's like, oh, this is fakey fake bullshit. She's actually evil, whatever. And I'm just like, oh, can I just please, like, I just want an Elastigirl movie. Like, that's all I want. Can I just have it? And like, her have
the answer is
friends?
No. You just can't. Like, seriously, right? You just can't.
Yeah, I know. I'm not permitted. And it's interesting because in the first movie, like, Mr. Incredible has his little this is how Mr. Incredible handles it when somebody really looks up to him. And the answer is that he's like very toxic towards that person and drives him to insane villainy, which is not great. And is kind of an indictment of Bob as a character. And the second movie, Helen gets that same thing, I think, in Void.
Yeah.
And they spend about 2 seconds on that shit before just plunking it directly into the garbage. Like, not even worth spending the time.
Right.
And I'm like, all right, cool. Like, thanks.
That's the truly baffling thing here, is that you get these little intimate scenes of characters building relationships. And I guess this is just a problem with action movies. When we get to the action, all that stuff is just thrown aside. And when we come out on the other side of the action, we've forgotten that those relationships were there at all, because there should be still some evidence of their bond. Maybe that's why Evelyn is like, oh, thank you for saving me, because they still have a little bit of that. Like you're saying, we deserve more. This movie is telling us we're going to get more. And then somehow it's over and we just didn't get it. And we're like, whoa, wait a minute. What happened to that? Oh, you just didn't do it. You just didn't show that point of view in that crucial moment.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It's like a rejection of it too, which is like like to raise the questions in the first place and then not answer them is very, ugh. I think what we should say at this point is like, is there anything that stood out to us in this movie that we didn't? So I'll say this, like, so yeah, we've been all over the place kind of talking about this movie. Some of that's probably on us. Some of that is by virtue of the film itself. Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that you wanted to talk about, or any?
No, nothing that I haven't brought up, but some of the scenes I was kind of pointing out earlier, like another thing that in the same way we keep coming back to why aren't the female relationships just like given a little more attention here and have them kind of pay off and make a little more logical sense? I'm still baffled by the way they deal with kids in this, and that we kind of turn all the heroes into villains. And the kids, they get out of it just in time. Thank goodness. But just choosing to do that, putting these glasses on the parents and just the look on their faces, it's, I wouldn't have cared about this a couple of years ago. I would have been like, whoa, that looks sweet. But I just think a little more now, and I don't have kids, but I think a little harder about what it means to show kids some of these images that are truly like being implanted in their brains, because they're not catching all this like plot stuff that we might be talking through. They're not thinking about the politics of the superhero insurance company or, all this stuff. They're seeing the two parents that they've grown to love watching two movies, and they have these glasses on and they're like about to murder their children or whatever. And there's all these grown-ups just overpowering these kids that have so little agency anyway. It's just, it's like, I don't know. I just don't really like it these days.
Yeah.
It's just something, I don't know. Maybe I'll change my mind in a couple of days, and I might not have said that same thing 2 years ago, but here and now on this podcast, it's just kind of bugging me.
This is funny because, like, I'm glad you're saying this. And I just want to say to you personally, I guess, that some of my favorite moments in these conversations that we've had is when one of us says something and we're just like, I just don't care for that. Or on the flip side, like, I just love that.
Yeah.
Like, because I love this whole podcast. I love, and I want to talk about, I like talking about reasons for things and reasons for feelings and motivations and everything and the analysis of it. That's all important to me, and I genuinely love it. But sometimes it's just like, this makes me feel bad.
It does.
And I'm like, that's a movie making thing. Like, that's by virtue of telling a story, and you have to think about that stuff. And I don't know. Anyway, kind of a tangent.
Yeah.
But
it's a great relief when the glasses come off. I'll say that. Like, I'm so grateful. And it's a great moment, the cute way they do it with like the kiss and stuff. So, I mean, it's done beautifully, but just right there and some of those shots, I'm just like, wow, this is quite intense. Anyway, go for it.
Yeah. Well, it's also a weird choice to do in a movies about parenting.
Yeah.
To have the parents kind of turn on you and be taken away from you. It's just weird. It's a weird choice. I have one final thought that has nothing to do with anything, but I don't like it either. It's not the same as yours. But I don't like I think some people probably did like this. It's such a weird, it feels like a gamble that they did this, but there's just like one quick shot when the kids are at home where they're watching Johnny Quest on the TV. Oh, right.
Yeah.
And it's the actual cartoon Johnny Quest. And I'm like, and just what? And it's not acknowledged and nothing. And I don't have any, I don't know. I don't have a good reason to not like it or not. And I loved Johnny Quest when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember watching that show on TV as a child and really enjoying it. And so when I see it, I'm like, oh my God, Johnny Quest. Like, I haven't seen that in so long. And then I was like, why is that in here? Like, stop. Is this a point that you're making that this is like a parallel to the real world, or like it's just so tonally confusing?
Is it a callback to when they do it in WALL-E? When they do it in WALL-E, when they actually watch a thing from our world, it makes sense for the character. But in this,
yeah, I feel like there's a lot of investment in WALL-E in drawing direct parallels to the real world, and in this one there isn't. And it's just this little wink of like, this is the '60s, remember?
Right.
Or whatever.
I guess it's a thing Dash would be watching. That's it.
Yeah, it really does feel like they just put that in there to kind of be like, shout out to people who know what Johnny Quest is.
Yeah, okay.
And so I'm not mad about that as a reason.
Yeah.
It feels very jarring to me. It's just another thing in there that I'm like, what? Like, and then I'm like, oh, I'm watching a movie. And it breaks my immersion.
No, exactly. Which, I mean, I guess, in conclusion to our conclusion, these movies are so well done. It just takes a tiny misstep like that to really throw you off, because it's doing such a great job of immersing you. Like, I'm not ever thinking about how this is rendered computer files. Like I'm here for these characters, and I want to know more about them, I guess is all we're saying. We just want to know more.
Yeah, and here's another thing. Honestly, if they do make an Incredibles 3, I'll check it out.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I think there's so much potential. But this movie, I just can't get into.
Yeah, we need a new we need a new creative team, I think. We don't need Brad Bird's Incredibles anymore.
Maybe, and
Maybe.
I feel bad. Like, I don't want to be like, hey, Brad Bird, no, I'm not into your stuff. I don't know. It feels weird. But I do... From a story, I want somebody to say something to me, and I want them to say it confidently.
Yeah. I mean, I want more Brad Bird movies. I just feel like, I think we've proven by the way we talk about this movie that he likes this world, but maybe doesn't love it as much as he did, 15 years ago.
Yeah. This movie was all over the place. I have a lot of weird feelings about it. Maybe more negative feelings than positive feelings. That's, it's going to happen sometimes in this podcast. But I'm glad that we did this. And I'm also really curious now to talk more about other sequels potentially. And I guess just for the listeners, we're in early days. We got a lot of episode ideas kicking around. We're still kind of formulating our pipeline. We got a little bit more. Mm-hmm. We got Soul coming up next, and who knows what we'll get into then. But when we do talk about sequels, I'm interested in how our thoughts and feelings will kind of develop about that and what makes a good sequel. It's like a unique storytelling challenge. I haven't really talked specifically about that very much before with anyone.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot about that stuff. And I mean, it's just unavoidable. We're going to keep running into this. So yeah, we'll find new ways to talk about sequels and try to take different points of view on them and give them maybe a little more credit for what they pull off instead of wishing they were, maybe something else, which I don't think we did too much, but can be a little unfair to something.
Yeah, as we've noted in the previous episodes, Incredibles is just a special case, just a special subset. And there's a lot to love about it and a lot to feel weird about.
Yeah.
So that's it for today. Please join us next week as we try to wrap our heads around Pixar's newest film we're very excited about, Soul.
Yay,
by
Soul.
Pete Docter, I believe.
Yeah, Pete's back. We're back in the Pete zone. So check out our episode archive and other facts about Caitlin and I at cartoonfeelings.com, the website. You can tweet us or join us on Instagram. Both can be found at Feeling Cartoons.
Yeah, we're feeling them. Big way. And if you have any thoughts or questions or any feelings at all, please share them by writing us at cartoonfeelingspodcast@gmail.com. We would love to know what you think. If it's good.
Yeah, we want to do like a mailbag episode someday. Come on.
Yeah, honestly, good, bad. Like if we left anything out, if there's anything at all.
Anything.
Just hit us up.
Good.
We'll read it.
Recipes.
Doesn't have to be about cartoons. Could just be personal.
Yeah, we got the time. Send an email. All right, that's all for now, folks. We'll see you next time.